Hey guys, it's your boy, Ballface8020, back again with another great commentary. I have a lot of nostalgia for the 80s and 90s. I wasn't around in the 70s, but I enjoy watching some stuff from the 50s, 60s, and 70s as well. Um, and it's always interesting with the past. I think that there's sometimes I don't know. There may be some times in the past where you can go back and say, yeah, things were just sucked then in every way, shape, or form. But like I remember as a kid, my dad thinking that, so I'm talking about in the mid late 90s, even the early 90s to a lesser extent. My dad talking about the 50s, 60s, and 70s as if they were a better time. And at the time, I thought he was just retarded and just some old guy living in the past. As I've gotten older, I see why he feels that way. Why he would have felt that way. I know my mom did not feel that way. She said she thought the 50s, 60s, and 70s sucked, and I think that's the difference between my dad, who had a good, something's just the differences that they have in life. Just they were very different people, but my mom's childhood basically sucked. She grew up in an apartment in the city, and didn't have like the greatest youth. And I mean, it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't great. Whereas my dad had the more like all American upbringing, like big house in the suburbs, and he was an athlete. I don't. My dad definitely wasn't one of the cool kids, but he was like well liked, and he did have a lot of friends. So I mean, I really don't think my dad was one of the cool kids. He was weird. He was like when he was a senior in high school, he tried to launch a coup against the student government. Like he got he had he got some people to go along with him, and he marched into like the student government meeting and demanded that they all resign and hand over power to him, which even if they wanted to do, they couldn't have happened. But anyway, I digress. So anyway, the reason I'm telling you guys all of this is because sometimes I watch stuff just for the nostalgia value. And, I'm always asking myself, like, am I remembering it as better than it was? And, like, I'll say in a million, like, there's a lot of ways things really are better today, and even some of, like, the social and political changes, right? Like, well, those changes came about even if you don't agree with them. Like, I mean, like, honestly, in many ways, the social and political environment of the 1990s was more in line with me, my values, what I'm comfortable with. And that could just be because, I'm right wing. It could be because that's what, I grew up with. I don't know. But the thing is, like, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that politically and socially, things in the 90s were better, okay, overall. And I think it's much more nuanced than that. But let's say they were. Then there really was real discontent there underneath the surface. So, like, yeah, maybe better for a lot of maybe better for most people even, but there was a lot of people who were really repressed in that culture, and it could be for issues of race, sexual orientation, not really women's rights in the 90s. I mean, honestly, I think we pushed girl power even harder than now, but race and sexual orientation, yeah. Especially sexual orientation, but even I don't even know if I want to say especially sexual orientation, because like by the 90s and 80s, right, you couldn't say anything like anti-black. It was like there was already like a big faux pas, and then there was like a real consciousness of including black people and being against racism, but it wasn't as like blacks were like much more their own thing than they are today. Like in my town, like, it's totally normal for me to see, black and white kids hanging out together or, you know, blacks and whites dating each other. That would never have happened when I was a kid. Now, you might have had like one black guy who hung out like with the group, but that was you would never see like mixed groups and stuff. So, you know, and again, I promise I'm going to get to the subject immediately, but I'm just saying that there are a lot of things. But the thing is, it's like, I don't know. I guess you take the bad with the good. There is no way to freeze stuff in time. You can just look back and then try to ask, like, was it better? And if it did change, was it worth it? I mean, you know, because like I've said before, I think change can be either good or bad, but it's always inevitable. That's the one constant. But the thing is, you know, it's gone, and we can debate whether it was better or worse until the end of time. But what I don't think can be debated is that it was a really special time, you know, the 80s and 90s in America. And I don't think anything captures that special time better than movies. And in particular, a movie that I am familiar with and I just started rewatching right now, called Heart of Justice. I think it might be, I can't remember if it's called Heart of Justice or The Heart of Justice. This was, and it's like, you know, it's so interesting watching it and just seeing it, nothing like it would be made today. And you know, you just like, I don't know if you have to see it to just get it, or, but it just wouldn't. And this film came out in 1992. And it was a made-for-TV movie. I don't even know if they do those anymore. And it was a made-for-TV movie that I had never seen because it was, like I said, made in 1992. I don't know whether it was released in 92 or it was released in 92. So I'm sorry. It was released in 92. It was probably shot the same year. But on cable TV, which I did not have. My cheap-ass parents wouldn't buy cable. So, we didn't have cable until my dad got sick and he needed, you know, something to watch during the day. So we didn't have cable until like for 8 years later. And so I ended up seeing it like way after the fact. I don't remember, again, 92, I would have been pretty young. So I don't know if like any of my classmates and stuff had been watching it. I'd never heard them talk about it. So I don't remember if it was when I was in high school or in college. I don't know. It probably wouldn't have been after that though. So, you know, one day, because again, this was like, you know, even when I was in college, like the internet was a big thing, but it wasn't like, my life wasn't as internet centric as it is now. You know, there was, we had one computer for the whole family in there. And then, so like, yes, I would use the internet a lot, but I also still watched a lot of TV. You know, I really like, you know, in high school and college, I really like to watch TV. I can't stand to watch TV now. I don't even know how to work my TV. You know, I only have it for when my nephews come over and, you know, they have to, either my brother or my sister-in-law or my sister has to figure out how to work it. You know, it's not like it was, but like when I was a kid, to turn on the TV, you just turned it on. Now you have to like 5 different remotes, and it's not for me. But anyway, that wasn't, like I said, that wasn't the case when I was in college, right? There was, or high school. So this probably happened when I was in college. Some night downstairs in the basement, just flipping channels, watching TV. And then somehow I come across this film, Heart of Justice. And the only reason that I watched it or kept watching it was because this was the first time I'd ever seen Jennifer Connelly. And I thought, like, this is the most beautiful woman I've ever seen her. And even now, looking back on it, I mean, Jennifer Connelly was out of this world beautiful when she was young. And she's interesting because she combines extreme beauty and extreme sex appeal. Like, usually it's one or the other. But Jennifer Connelly is both. And so I see her, and that's what keeps me watching the film. But anyway, I guess what I was trying to say is she was very beautiful when she was young. This may have been the most beautiful, like this film may have been the most beautiful she ever was, which is strange for a TV film. And, before I go to talk about the movie, I'll say, some other interesting things about this. This is, again, a made for TV. When I talk about it could never be made today. Well, there are a lot of reasons for that, but one of the things is this is a made for TV film. And who do you, starring Eric Stoltz, starring Jennifer Connelly, and then supporting performances from, okay, it was kind of early. It was pre-star William H. Macy, but he was in it. And then Dennis Hopper is there in a supporting role. Was there anybody else of note? Well, there was William H. Macy, but he wasn't really a star at the time. And then there was Dylan Mulroney. But still, I mean, Dennis Hopper, was already a big deal by 1992. And and Eric Stoltz, like, no, he wasn't an A-lister. It looked for a while like he might become an A-lister in the late 80s, or the late 80s, and then probably the mid 80s. He was supposedly, again, I'm sorry about the digression, but I haven't confirmed this, but Eric Stoltz was supposedly in the top running to play the part that of Maverick that Tom Cruise played in Top Gun before Eric Stoltz got fired from Back to the Future. So yeah, and but the thing is, like, the film, just watching even like the first 10 minutes really take you back, because although I've never been to one before, when I was a kid, you had these like fancy French restaurants that like the super rich would go to, and you could only go there with a suit. Like, you had to wear a suit to go in there. Those don't exist anymore. As far as I know, there are no such restaurants. I mean, maybe somewhere in New York City, but especially like, like the kind of restaurants that were really big, if you ever see or read American Psycho. Those were a huge deal, not just maybe the 80s were their hey, I don't know, but into the into the 90s too. These sort of like really high-end French restaurants where you had to wear a suit. And then so one of the first things you see in the movie is two rich guys, talking in some expensive French restaurant to a bunch of other rich guys. Sorry, no, I forgot where I was. But so like right from the beginning, they're taking you back to something that doesn't exist anymore. And then you see, again, and this is all within like the first 10, maybe 20 minutes, one scene where, the Eric Stoltz character is greeting his friend William H. Macy in a restaurant. They're both getting coffee or whatever, and Eric Stoltz lights up a cigarette. Just in the restaurant, just lights up a cigarette. And because I remember when they made that change too. And look, I have asthma. I think it's a good change that you can't just like smoke like you can't just smoke in public places or public eateries or things like that anymore. Yeah, when I was a kid, they would have like, you go to IHOP or something, there would be like a smoking section, So and then it was like, but you could like, and then maybe some places didn't have that. This is in New York, so maybe they were probably more leeway, just saying like anybody can smoke anywhere. And the character, Eric Stoltz's character, is a star reporter at a newspaper. See, that was a big thing when I was young. In fact, there was a time that I dreamed of being a reporter. There was even like like the whole like Superman thing, is he's a newspaper reporter, because that was like a prestigious job, like this like this whole idea of being a hotshot reporter, that meme, trope, whatever archetype, was a real big thing in the 80s and 90s. It was a real thing, and it's just completely gone now. And just seeing, and then William H. Macy's character, while he's talking to Eric Stoltz's character, him take out the newspaper, and he's just, and just reading it. And like, I remember, as a kid, and yeah, sure, I only cared about the comics and the sports section, but I remember going out and grabbing the paper, and then, coming in, and going to the sports section and to read it, and then to look at the comics, and like the soul that was there. There was like the like of having like this physical thing, right? And as opposed to just reading it on a computer screen. And there's a kind of like, not to be melodramatic, but there is a kind of magic in it that you don't get with a podcast or a YouTube video or or reading it on a news website. Or like, just being able to like turn something on and seeing like local news, which is, I was never super into, but just that it was there. So, yeah, I mean, and then like, I mean, not that I have the option, but you don't see me offering to give it up. It's not like you don't see, like, I also remember, like, if you wanted to find directions to someplace, good luck. I mean, you take out like a paper map and try to do it. I mean, hell, even after the internet was on the scene, I would have to like look up MapQuest directions and print them out. And I got lost millions of times doing that. And not an issue now. And so yeah, again, a lot of bad stuff too. And some stuff I remember. One thing, again, another quick aside. When I was a kid, drive-through movie theaters were already done, and I thought those sounded so cool. And I remember telling my dad about it, and he's like, "No, those things were terrible. They went extinct for a reason." And I remember I asked my mom about it years later, and she's like, "Oh, he was right. Those things were awful." And now I kind of think that, yeah, they were probably right, but I don't know why as a kid I thought they were cool. Now bell bottoms, nobody misses those. Yeah, but I guess the last thing I want to say is that like, I mean, before I talk a little bit about the film, is this 50s, 60s, and 70s, even the 40s, have their own magic in some ways. Like a film like Double Indemnity is really cool in its time, and that was from the 1940s. So they have their own level of magic too. And I'm not saying that things today don't have their own level of magic, but as somebody who's watched a lot of stuff from 40s, 50s, 60s, maybe not 40s, but some stuff from the 40s, so 50s, 60s, 70s, there's something really special about mid to late 80s through the mid 90s. There's something really special, and can't put my finger exactly what it is. It's just like a magic that we've lost. And a great, like, if you wanted like a not so serious example, something like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and then maybe a few years later, Wayne's World. Again, they really could have only been made in that 85 through 95 time period. Now, as for the film itself, it's one of my favorite genres, neo-noir. I don't know if I pronounced that right. I liked 40s and 50s noir, too, the non-neo-noir. In a lot of ways, I think that I was able to enjoy films like that more when I was really young and didn't understand, like, just how unrealistic a lot of the stuff was. I mean, I can suspend disbelief. Okay, I just have a problem with things not really making sense, even within the universe. And, I think I talked about that for something like, a film like The Watcher. Like, that just could never happen. Like I liked the film, but it just wouldn't work because that's just not, no. Now you can go watch that review if you want to see like all the holes with something like that. But this is neo-noir. So, and a great neo-noir film, much better than this one actually, is Lost Highway. Because that's done in a way where it does make sense. That's just a great film. What's that guy's name again? He also did Mulholland Drive and Twin Peaks. Sorry, I'm blanking on the name. The famous guy, but Mulholland Drive, Twin Peaks. You can look it up if you're interested. And then Lost Highway is a great film. I mean, it really is just it's really good. Really great neo-noir. Hell, even like The Watcher, which I just mentioned, is neo-noir. Maybe more retarded. This one, not as good as Lost Highway. I'm talking about Heart of Justice. Better than The Watcher, which is, again, okay, but nothing special. This one, again, for a made-for-TV movie, you think, like, how can you make a special film? And they really did, I mean, it's not just, past nostalgia. This works. This story works, and the execution of it works. I don't want to tell too much to not give it away. And in fairness, not a ton really happens. It's more for, it's definitely one of those more like it's about the journey, not the destination type films. And actually, the first time I saw it, I remember being really dissatisfied and confused with the ending. And then when I finally did start to understand it, I was like, oh, that's stupid. And then it was only now I was watching it for just nostalgia reasons, and read a comment in it, and read a comment in the YouTube section. And if you're going to watch, don't read the comment first, okay? Don't go there. Just watch the film first, and then you can read it later. And it was an explanation. It was like, oh, there was actually some more depth that I realized. They weren't just producing made-for-TV slop that just didn't make it with an ending that didn't make sense. No, it all made sense. It might not work for you, but it all made sense, and there is a real cohesive story there. Everything does have a point in its own way. So yeah, maybe not like the payoff you're expecting, but something that I think is really intellectually satisfying when you understand it and reflect on it. So yeah, I don't know how seriously you guys take my recommendations, but this is a really strong recommendation on my part that, you go out and watch this film. If you have any thoughts, let me know in the comments. One other thing I wanted to say before I go. I think actually the reason that I was rewatching it was not Jennifer Connelly. It was Eric Stoltz. And he's a guy who really interests me a lot because he's got this soft voice, maybe probably a softer voice than me. And he is not an athletic looking guy. He's like, his frame is like the definition of average, better than mine, but not good. And he's got in this film, you see him without his shirt, pretty often. He's got no like vascularity or muscle tone. My guess is the guy has never touched a weight in his life. And he's probably not very strong. And I don't know if he's a bad athlete, but he doesn't look like a particularly good one. Maybe a little bit taller than average, like around 5'11". Now, he does have kind of, I hadn't really noticed it until, just watching it recently, have kind of masculine facial features. But overall, like, again, he just, again, with the soft voice, he's not very big. He doesn't look very athletic. He doesn't look like a guy who would be violent. And to see a guy like that, have such command of, like, this is a guy, like, of just his surroundings, and to be dominant, and, reading about him, that he was a very intimidating actor to work with on set. Even in, like, if you've seen Back to the Future, he was initially cast as the role that Michael J. Fox played. And the bully in that film, Biff, the guy who played him couldn't stand Eric Stoltz. He said that, like, there was, like, one altercation where he said, you got to dial it back on the scene, like, where you're pushing me. And Stoltz just blatantly ignored him and keep doing it to the point where he actually bruised the guy's collarbones. Well, that's a big guy who he did that to. And then this is a guy who's just going to do things his way. And if you don't like it, tough shit. And I'm not saying that's good or admirable. Except from what I hear, the guy's basically a jerk, and, which is why he plays jerks so well. But I'm not saying, even though I'm sure I wouldn't like him on a personal level, I do really like him as an actor because he's been in other films like Killing Zoe and stuff. I've always, and, he had a scene in Pulp Fiction that was really good. I think he's a guy who I really enjoy watching as an actor. But even if I didn't, he's seeing a guy, like I said, isn't really impressive physically. Now, maybe he's not unimpressive, but he's not impressive physically, be able to be so dominant in a way that much bigger guys aren't. The reason I'm thinking about it so much is because, like I've been back in sales, recently, and, I feel like, not I feel like, one of my coworkers, short, heavy-set black girl, so not like physically imposing at all, and I doubt she's violent or anything or ever did, but she doesn't need to be. She's just able to. She just has like this aura. So like and like most of her business, all of her business comes through referrals. She does like whereas I go and cold call, she just goes to car dealerships and introduces herself, and then they like says like you need to get somebody signed up so they can take the car off your lot. Bring them my way, send them my way, and I'll get them insured, and, you'll have that sale. And the thing is, like, people will send her business because she just has that aura. Like, now you could say, like, well, I could try to do the same thing. You, Baldface 8020, could do the same thing. Yeah, but do you think any of them are going to refer business to me? No, they'd be like, dude, what the hell are you? Get the hell out of here, man. And it's just like there really is something to it that like, presence, aura, whatever you want to call it, that goes beyond like anything you see in the physical. It's a real thing. And, maybe it seems like, well, if it's not physical, it's something you can develop. I don't know. I don't think so. I think that, I think you can learn how to behave in certain ways to be more effective. But I would think something like that, like if you wanted to have like what my coworker has, or something like what Eric Stoltz has, like, you could have taken like, all the sales training in the world isn't going to let me do things the way she does. And all the acting classes in the world aren't going to make, somebody have like the magnetism and just command that somebody like Eric Stoltz does, even if they physically are, really similar dimensions and looks and stuff like that. That's all for now. See you in the next.